Hey everyone, welcome to another podcast with Career Kickstart Conversation. I'm Kailyn, of course, your host, and then today we have Zach from 26 Talent Acquisition. So he will introduce himself, and then we'll get jumping into the topics today, which are candidate experience in talent acquisition. We'll be talking about from both perspectives, what's TA doing, what they should do, and then candidates. What does that look like for you, what it is, and what's a good candidate versus bad, and so forth. Towards the end, we'll jump into the workplace. Still hang around if you are a candidate, because it'd be very interesting to see where the workplace was and where it's going. Very interesting, and it affects you, I guess, just as much as TA, but hang around for that, but it'd definitely be interesting for talent acquisition, partners, managers, specialists, whoever you are in the world of HR will be interesting for you to get these insights. We'd love to hear from you too. If you have any comments and your thoughts, please put them below on YouTube. Without further ado, welcome, Zach. Thanks for coming today.
Hey, Kailyn. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Again, my name is Zachary Sipe. I'm a talent acquisition manager for 26 Technologies. It's a mid-size R&D organization that focuses on government contracting with the government and military agencies. So I'm excited to be here and talk about candidate experience and the workplace, past, current, and future.
Cool. All right. And then heads up to Zach has commercial and government background. So if you're interested in that, he will have really good insights on kind of both takes of those. All right. So candidate experience, a lot of people who maybe not are in HR or whatever, they might not know what that is. What is candidate experience?
Yeah. So what is candidate experience? So candidate experience is every touch point that a candidate has with an organization all the way from start to finish, whether that is looking at your company website, your job application page, all the way to the final offer or rejection notice. And so it's more about just than a hire, just getting a hire. It's more about giving the impression that aligns with your employer brand, right? So a positive experience can turn a candidate into a brand ambassador for you. But also on the negative flip side, a negative candidate experience can also hurt your recruitment efforts. So it's very important to have a positive candidate experience throughout the process. And everyone in your organization is attributing to that overall experience, whether they are a hiring manager, recruiter, TA specialist, HR, hiring manager, et cetera.
Okay, great. And in the candidate experience, so it's a lot of people involved, and like you said, there can be a brand ambassador for you. I'm assuming, you're talking about them going online and maybe talking poorly or greatly about your experience. So definitely it can affect your brand. We'll talk about like the flags in a candidate experience, and thanks for highlighting how important it is. And I have some stats too that I'll throw in here and there. I'll trickle in. But the flags in a candidate experience, what are typical red flags in a candidate experience from the candidate's point of view?
Yeah, that's a great question. So red flags would be inconsistent messaging, right? I'm sure some candidates have had the experience where they talk to a recruiter, sounds really great, and then they go to the interview and the job is mismatched. Maybe the recruiter is like, yeah, you can work fully remote or hybrid. And then the manager is like, no, you're going to need to be here like 100% in the office, or the responsibilities are totally different. That doesn't leave you that conversation with the warm and fuzzies where you're excited about the opportunity. So of course, that is a major red flag. Another is lack of follow-up, right? Where between each stage, you hear radio silence. It's 5 days, a week, 2 weeks before you hear back. Some people I've heard of with larger organizations, unfortunately, it can be months before they hear back, and they can waste half a year going through a process, and they've already started another job and gotten a couple of months into it before they hear back on something they were interested in when they applied, but the time took so long that, that ship had sailed. Another one is unengaged interviewers or hiring teams, right? Where it's more like they're just going through the process and almost passive in their candidate search. That is tough to attract talent. And so that would be something to be mindful of, right? On both ends, whether you're the company hiring or the candidate interviewing, or you want to get the warm and fuzzies, you want them to feel like it was meant to be in a way. You want to be engaged in the process, but you also want them to be engaged in it. So not only some red flags, but also kind of alluding to some positive green flags too.
Yeah, those are definitely ones to look out for. That's a major red flag too. A recruiter says, oh, it's this, and then it's completely different when you get into the interview. But it happens often, more often than I thought it would when I got into recruiting, at least. So you mentioned like a couple red flags. What are some other red flags, or would you say just kind of the opposite? I mean, sorry, green flags, green flags. Would you just say the green flags are the opposite of those red flags?
Right. So I would say it would be the opposite of those. So clear communication, right? Hopefully consistency in that message. We'll talk about it in a second, but like developing a good candidate experience. You want the recruiting team and the hiring team to be one. You don't want them to be, separate and have inconsistent explanations of it. You want them to be, kind of tied together there. You want it to be like respectful interactions, right? I'm putting in time throughout the interview. They are spending time to talk with you. So you want to have a mutual respect there. And then, of course, structure. So when you're having those initial conversations, I always love it when candidates beat me to the punch and they're like, what can I expect in the process? Even if I haven't said we're moving forward or anything, they still ask and they want to know, what is a typical process? And if for us, each process is slightly tailored to the kind of skill set or job, right? Because certain jobs require a little bit additional technical vetting and things like that, just because at 2-6, we do very niche research within the government. So we try to tailor that to, the skill set. But when I do know that, kind of lay it out, what can they expect? What is the time frame that they can expect that to happen? Even if it's rough, right? I typically am like around 2 weeks, we can have everything done if it's just 2 steps. But if it's shorter or longer, I'll reach out and let you know as we adjust. And most of the time it's shorter, which they appreciate.
Yeah, I like what do people call it? It's the over promise and under deliver, I think is yeah. So I do that too in my strategy. I'm like, I'm going to give you like the worst case scenario, then the average scenario, and hopefully we come through better.
Exactly. I always over project, and that way we're always coming a little bit under, and it, makes everyone happy. The candidate's like,
Yeah.
oh, we're moving fast. And, they're still interested, especially in our space, kind of alluding to how the government contracting space is slightly different, is they all have multiple opportunities. So if we go over a week without communication or updates, they could not only already have heard of another opportunity, they could have already accepted and have a start date scheduled, especially when you get into higher clearances. And even if we have delays in contracts or anything, tell them immediately so that they know we're still interested, but the timeline has adjusted, just to open up that communication.
Yeah, especially like government, yeah, high competition with those candidates in it. And government, I'm not too familiar, you are, but do you see the government on those contracts changing the start date? Is there a lot of change that happens with the government, or is it usually pretty set in stone?
So I can't give a perfect answer. You'd have to ask me every couple of weeks throughout the year, and I'd probably have a slightly different answer for that. I would say, especially with this year, with it being an election year, there were definitely some things that moved to the right a little bit. Now things are starting to move in a more formal pace, but there have been some delays this year, and there always can be, right? There are certain things that attribute to that from the contracting side of things or all kinds of factors. So they can move to the right, but I wouldn't say like every contract moves to the right. There's a lot of hands in the process. So sometimes there are delays, some more than others. We've had some that were only delayed like a week, which is not a big deal. It's not going to really change a start date. We can sometimes start them on overhead and kind of keep going without skipping a beat. There's others where we were expecting an award and, they delayed it by a year. Some large IDIQs 2 years just because they kind of had a new idea, your direction and funding and things like that. We still ended up getting it. It was just, of course, a lot longer down the road, but luckily it wasn't anything where we had invested a lot in hiring folks and they were, sitting there waiting. It was more of, okay, we were ready to start hiring as soon as they gave us the green light, but the green light was delayed. So nothing major, but that is something that you experience.
Yeah, okay, nothing major. Luckily, in that scenario, didn't affect your candidate experiences. The hiring hadn't really took full force yet. So the red flags you mentioned, kind of going backwards a little bit. So what would that say to a candidate? Like what do those things mean for a candidate? Like the example you said, a recruiter saying one job and the hiring manager saying another. What should that tell a candidate?
Well, it's conflicting stories. So it's like, who do you believe? And unfortunately, I hate to shed light on this because being a recruiter, I always, hope that people, respect and trust, what I'm saying to them because I am, transparent and honest, in everything that I do. But people have had negative experiences with recruiters, staffing firms, et cetera. And so they kind of go into those conversations a little bit hesitant of, okay, are they just trying to get me along into the process so they can get a hire? or are they actually looking for the right person? Or are they interested in finding me a job? So that is something that all of us in the industry have to do, right? To, have them trust us and be genuine in that. So if there's red flags between what you are saying and what the actual team is saying, you've kind of lost that trust there. And so potentially lose that candidate, because what if they have 2 other processes that they're considering and everything's matching up on that end? Well, you could be paying more, you could have a much more interesting job, but if you have that one little hiccup in consistency of communication, that can really hurt you.
Yeah, I'll throw in a stat here because it's pretty relevant. So this was I don't know how IBM conducted this, but this is the source. So companies that invest in candidate experience improve their quality of hires by 70%. So I think the quality piece was interesting in that stat, and 70% is massive, but improve their quality of hires. So it seems like it affects a lot of top talent too. So you're losing out on top talent and good hires. So, and I think it kind of alludes to the fact, like you said, the trust thing. So maybe they accept a role that maybe they were desperate for a job, they accept this role, but everything was a little weird. The recruiter said one thing, the hiring manager said the other. So now you don't have a quality hire. That person isn't going to probably stay. They start off on a bad foot, and then another company calls and then they're out the door. And you could have had someone
Exactly.
just coming in such like a strong start, is what I took
Right.
from that stat. But
Yeah, absolutely. Retention is just as important as the acquisition or attracting stage of hiring, right? If you do all that work to acquire talent and they're out the door within 6 months to a year, that's even bigger red flag for you internally there. So candidate experience is huge there, and it's crucial. And you mentioned something earlier, for candidates who are doing a lot more research on companies. There's platforms like Glassdoor where they're amplifying the voice of candidates. And as that has become more of a tool for candidates, I hear all the time on initial conversations like, hey, I looked you up on Glassdoor and I saw really great things. Excited to hear, what more you can add to it. And so that's just really important, because that is just their perception before they even talk to you. So if you can add on to that, it's important. And if you can avoid adding any kind of negative to that candidate perception, then you're in a lot better place. And all it takes is one negative voice for it to kind of silence all the positive, right? From anything, not just in talent. You go to Yelp, any kind of reviews, product reviews on Amazon, the one negative review is what everyone looks for. They don't look for the 100 positive, they look for the negative. So it's really important to try to avoid those, individual negative voices.
yeah, I was just about to kind of go into like how bad it is for a business. And you mentioned like the Glassdoor, and before they even talk to anyone at your company, it could start off at a bad conversation. And then your first conversation with that candidate is almost trying to like sell the company, like, oh, we're not bad, just a couple, it's, you want the first call to be like really, really good and positive, like you said. Are there any other ways it could negatively affect the business, even outside of the candidate experience? Like you mentioned, someone posting on LinkedIn. Why would that negative post about their experience on LinkedIn affect the business, even outside of maybe getting quality hires, if it does?
Yeah, I mean, people really value word of mouth, referrals, impressions, feedback, right? Especially in our space, the pond of talent is so much smaller in the cleared space that it is very likely for them to know someone that has interacted with your company. And in addition to them going to Glassdoor, looking at LinkedIn and all of those different platforms, they're going to see if they know anyone that works there currently, and they're going to reach out and ask them for their impression. And so it's not only important to give a good candidate experience to incoming talent pools, but also making sure that your current employees are having that consistent positive experience. And that's all the way through onboarding too, not just offer or rejection. You can kind of tweak the candidate perception through onboarding. So that's kind of a later phase that you want to make sure, because you can have a great attraction period and hiring period, but if you have a weird onboarding and introductory period in the company, that can also, lead to negative impressions too. So it's important to, keep an eye on it from all angles.
Yeah, 100%. Here's a couple other stats. I should have said this one earlier when we were talking about the green flags, but the clear communication, following up, not ghosting, just being in that constant communication. If you have an update, just give it to them like as soon as you can, like real time. This is from LinkedIn. It says clear communication increases a candidate's offer acceptance by 3 times, which is insane. So offer acceptance. So they're including everyone who's gotten an offer. I already knew these things, but once I saw the stats, I'm like, it's even more important than I even thought it was. And I'm in recruitment, like I know how important it is, but the stats were really shocking. And then it says, this is from Career Arc, 72% of candidates who experience a poor candidate journey share their experience online or directly with others. So like you said, people are posting about it. It's going to get out there, and 72% of people, not many people post about their good experiences as much as they do their poor. And generally speaking, if you had a bad experience at a restaurant, like that's going to be posted more likely than a good experience. And same with business, maybe even more so, especially with recruitment and candidate experience.
Right. And that kind of goes into a later topic of like how things have changed in the workplace in a couple of ways, right? Too. Candidates are really valuing kind of work-life balance, the culture of companies, rather than just what are the job responsibilities, what are the pay and the benefits, right? They're looking at overall offerings that a company can have. They want to be happy with what they're doing and feel like they're contributing to something. So if they get any hint that that is not going to match what they're looking for, they rather look for something else.
Yeah, exactly. And this one isn't too much for the candidate, but talent acquisition manager comes into a new company. Candidate experience isn't good at all. What tip would you give for someone in that situation? Like, where would they start? How would they start to improve their candidate experience? Any tips on like the beginning of that process for them?
Yeah, so I think the starting place would be to take a wider look at your process overall and one, see if across the organization it's consistent, right? When I was working in the staffing agency world, right, I worked with all different kinds of companies, small, medium, large, and everyone did things differently, right? And the ones that were most successful are the ones that had their process figured out and consistent. And the ones that were a little bit less successful on that, or just unsuccessful in attracting talent, were the ones that kind of created the process as they went. Every interviewer had totally different questions, even if it was the exact same role, same project, they would just go about it completely differently. So they're introducing biases and things like that, which isn't successful from a talent evaluation standpoint either, but also from a candidate experience, right? You could get lucky and get someone that, did a good interview or good process, and then you could get unlucky with someone that maybe it was a bad day and they didn't give a great experience, right? And so you're really hurting your chances to have a consistent process and attracting top talent. Another piece is, like I mentioned, training. You want everyone trained across the process, not just one training for TA, one training for the hiring managers, and one training for the technical interviewers, right? You want to get everyone in a similar training. That's something that we've introduced at 2.6 is we'll do interview training, hiring manager training, where everyone is in there regardless of like their role into it. So everyone is like aligned. And even if, hiring manager isn't doing the technical evaluation or the recruiter isn't getting in and understanding how code share is going, like, I'm not going to be able to hop in and be like, oh, you coded that wrong. But I at least know what they are doing and how they are evaluating. So when I'm talking on the front end with the candidate, I can at least give them an idea of what they can expect in each stage. So everyone has a peer view into each step of that, and it offers a consistent process there. And of course, professionalism. That sounds kind of redundant, right? Or basic in interviewing for a company, right? Or being an interviewer for a company. You want to be professional, but, sometimes they'll be, surprised if this is their first time interviewing. Sometimes they don't know the right etiquette and things like that. And then another piece is feedback, whether they offer it or not. Always ask the candidate throughout the stage of interviewing, offering, onboarding, if they have any feedback for you, because that's the best way to do it. Another thing is if you're not comfortable, or let's just say you forget to ask it with every candidate, we have surveys in place that are sent at different stages. Of course, they're not getting a survey every step of the way. It just kind of depends on how they progress. If we offer them, they get it after the offer. If we don't move forward with the offer, they still get a survey after we've dispositioned them in our system and everything. And then they also get one after they join 2.6, capturing that data. And we're taking that and implementing it into process improvements.
Oh, that's great. And all great tips. I think my two favorites that I heard were, just me personally, were the hiring manager training and the surveys, actually getting it from your candidates and actually implementing it. It's one thing doing surveys. If you don't implement it, your business isn't going to better itself, and your customers are the best person to get that feedback from. Or I say customers, but candidates, customers.
Exactly. And through the interview trainings, you're also getting feedback from the hiring teams themselves on how to improve it. So you're constantly kind of shaping it and perfecting it, and you're never going to have it perfect. It's always going to be like a growing and evolving process, but that's the point of it, right? You always want to be, striving for for, a better process. And we've seen significant improvement in, conversion of talent and overall experience.
That's great. Yeah. And I was actually talking about this the other day with my team. There's not a lot of leadership training, hiring manager training that companies do. So at least from my experience, you guys sound pretty unique in that. I mean, a lot of people who interview our candidates, and we attend all of our interviews to help guide and stuff. We have more of like a consultancy approach as a staffing agency, but immediately you can tell someone who's been trained or been doing it for a while in terms of interviewing, hiring, and those who haven't. The biggest differentiator I see is just the skills in the interview, the types of questions, how long it's lasting, the professionalism, like you said, and then the feedback from the hiring manager after. Most of the time they're like, oh, I had a gut feeling. I'm like, oh gosh, definitely can't hire off of a gut feeling. Like, let that guide you to why you had that feeling. But yeah, so the training is just, it's so important because a lot of people who get into that management level are just kind of thrown in. They're like, oh, you were good as an individual contributor, you should be great as a hiring manager. And then sometimes they are, sometimes it's not, and they don't have that training, and then they build out their team and then they failed because then their quality of work on their team is going to affect them and their success. And so it's just such a trickle down effect that I don't think really people and businesses take seriously. But anyway, that's my 2 cents on it.
No, absolutely. In the hiring process, not everyone is, their day-to-day goal and responsibilities is not talent, right? That's some things that you kind of have to step back and realize as a talent or HR professional is that, a lot of the interviewers are more technical contributors. They might be hiring managers, but they're not only focused on hiring, they're also managing projects, portfolios of works, programs, all kinds of things, winning new work. So sometimes, figuring out the process improvements for interviewing is not their top priority. And that's where we have to step in and take that responsibility. But if you at least lead them to that and set up the training and introduce it to everyone, you typically get great feedback from them. No one is typically complaining that you are getting everyone on the same page of a process. You're doing something that they don't have time to. So typically you get good results and good feedback from all ends there.
Yeah. And the training approach, I think, is such a good approach because, and with staffing, we consult our hiring managers and stuff, but it's always one-on-one. We're not going into their companies and doing training. We offer that, but a lot of people don't do that. They have their own TA, whatever. But I'm assuming you do your training in group sessions, or is it one-on-one?
Yeah. So we do some where we'll do it what we call like mind shares or 101s where anyone across the company can join, where they're more general. But we also have some more that are more specialized into specific business units because, again, we do very specialized research. So each process is a little bit tailored to their approach and their kind of technical skill sets. There's different things that work better. Some of them, again, we're doing research for the government, so we have to do a lot of like product demos, presentations, things like that. So if you're going to be in a role doing that, you kind of need to be able to show that you can do a technical presentation. Others, they're doing technical development. So we kind of need to make sure that you have the development skills and experience, right? So each process is a little bit different. So for those trainings, we'll tailor that process. They're like, okay, if you're doing this kind of technical development work, let's say the interview process is 2 steps, 60-minute technical, 30-minute leadership. We put that into a training deck or PowerPoint and we walk through it with them. And we not only tell them what their role is, we were like, this is what talent is doing. This is the steps that are happening before they get to you. This is how they get to you. Or not just throw on interviews on your calendar. This is everything that is getting them to you. And then this is your role into it. And then after that, this is where it's going. And in there, we'll add in nuggets of why is it important for you to share your feedback, because we have what we call scorecards that they submit and things like that. So it's not just verbal feedback. They actually have a chance to like write down their feedback and kind of highlight what skills they have or they lack, et cetera. So that on the TA and hiring manager end, we can compare scorecards and see, are there inconsistencies? Do they match? Is it unanimous? Yes, unanimous no's, stuff like that.
Oh, that's great. The structure and the process and how you do it. Like, that's so, so good. Because I see a lot of interviews too, and candidates sometimes have to go through 5 interviews, and then each interviewer is asking the same exact questions because they didn't communicate. And then I'm like, you guys did 5 interviews and you could have gotten just so much more out of this candidate. And the candidate too could have got so much more out of the interviews, but everyone's asking, tell me about yourself.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually a bullet or two in each of the trainings. Is, hey, these are the criteria that each skill group is focused on. And then the leadership portion is focused on this. So your lane is here. You can, of course, always encourage ice breaking. You don't want to just jump in and make it like take a test, right? But it's more of like, okay, we already figured out start date preference, location, for us, clearance, all of that kind of stuff. They can just get to know the candidate and then evaluate the candidate and then move them on to the next step. But in the training, it's important to highlight, hey, you only have a limited amount of time to evaluate this candidate. Don't waste asking questions that have already been asked.
Yeah, exactly. I see that's probably the number one thing I see and then the candidate's like, well, this company doesn't communicate. Like that's probably goes into their head and they're not structured. And a lot of people don't want to feel like they're going to a company that's chaotic and doesn't communicate. Because it reflects that maybe their day-to-day may be a little bit like that as well. Minus the people who thrive in chaos. Maybe they'll be fine with it. It's so nice to hear companies are doing this. And so many don't. So many don't. And not say their candidate experience is bad, but there's just so much room for improvement. And I don't want to like downplay it, but it's not that hard to put them in place and do it. It's probably hard to get people on board and doing it, especially if it's a new change. And like when we do one-on-one with hiring managers, we're not changing their process, but we're just kind of giving tips and whatnot. A lot of times it really hurts their ego, which is why I asked, like, do you do group trainings or one-on-one? Because sometimes when we try to deliver the tips in a nice way to like help them and benefit and try to get that top talent, they're like, well, I've been hiring, longer than you have, or they get really defensive, which is, it's natural, but it's like, oh man, but this would help you so much. Like my job is to get you top talent and I can't do that alone. You're interviewing and we got to be on the same page here. Even when I was in internal recruiting, a lot of hiring managers got their ego just bruised and they want to do it their way. It's just like that wall you have to break through. What's your tip for talent acquisition managers who maybe are trying to put these processes in place, but the hiring managers are just like, nope, I've been doing it this way for 20 years. I'm going to ask these questions and you can kind of deal with it, like whatever it is, but they're just not able to get through to them. Any tips there?
So that's where you really have to put on your kind of consultant hat, whether you are a talent staffing consultant or an internal recruiter, talent manager, et cetera, right? Instead of, if they're not receptive to some of the training that you're trying to provide, or even the idea of proposing a training, see if you have been successful with other hiring managers or hiring teams or other clients that you have done this. And instead of, hey, you're doing this wrong, or hey, you need to change this, it's more of, here's an example of where it was successful. This was the result. Would you be comfortable doing something like that? And they could say no, right? They could be a stubborn hiring manager. We've all have dealt with those probably more than once. And it's more about just not giving up and continuing to try to reintroduce new processes, ideas, or slight tweaks, right? Not completely canning their process and changing it. Maybe introducing new things at a time, right? It doesn't happen overnight. Everything that I've laid out for you, we did not have as soon as I joined, we did not have within the first 6 months, first year. This has been a long work in progress, and it's going to continue being a work in progress. So just because it's not there now doesn't mean it won't be soon enough. You just have to take the wins where you can get it. And some managers, right, in our experience, we have some divisions that we've brought almost to finish line and we're just continuing polishing touches. Others, we're starting from scratch because they also had their process. They've always done it this way. The same hiring managers have been in those roles for a decade, and it's hard to get them to move away from that, especially when all of them have been there for that long. It's harder when you have that group think involved. But then all it takes also is one new hiring manager in that group. And if you get them bought in, then eventually it spreads to the rest of the group. So it really depends, but you just have to find your foothold, and eventually the rest will get there. And we've had all those experience, both at 2-6 and at my time at the staffing agency. You just have to, find your wins where you can and try to get small wins where you can in the more difficult areas as well.
Yeah. That's a really good tip. And I'm going to list one more because I thought this was interesting. And from a business perspective, I think it would be interesting for owners, whoever. But this example with Virgin Media. So Virgin Media transformed its recruitment strategy after realizing poor candidate experience cost the company $5.4 million annually due to lost customer loyalty. And I'm sure some of that money, too, is retention and turnover and training and all that stuff. But 5.4 million annually customer loyalty. And I dug a little bit deeper on this and I'm like, how does a candidate experience affect customer loyalty? And these people came in as customers and then they went with a different service because they just had a bad experience, whether that's a candidate experience. Well, it did say candidate experience specifically. So people who maybe didn't even work at their company, they left that candidate experience and switched services to a competitor. So it can affect your revenue, but by millions. I mean, I don't know how big Virgin Media is. Obviously pretty big, but
Right. Yeah, I mean, talent affects everything. Candidate experience affects everything, talent too, regardless of the stage. Like you were saying, it can happen when they're departing too, or after they've already joined. So it's interesting that it impacted on the customer or client side as well. But what I would think is imagine an essential role that is client facing, and then they have a negative experience with their employer and then they leave. Well, most people that are client facing will let their clients know, hey, I'm leaving to go elsewhere, just to not burn that bridge and just let them know. And sometimes some things get slipped and they let them know they had a negative experience and that's why they're leaving. And then their client is mad because the person they had built all this trust with and did all this business with is leaving. And now you're about to introduce either no one until you backfill it, or someone new that they don't have the trust for yet. And all of a sudden, a client that you've had for years is all of a sudden on the market for a new rep or, support in the service that you do. And so just one key loss and bad experience can really, like you said, hurt you financially across the board.
yeah. Yeah, I don't think people realize the reach that it has. It's wild, but it makes sense when you really think about it. And I don't know if this is new or been around forever on Glassdoor, but when I got exposed to it and talked about it with hiring managers, companies, whatever, they just thought it was employees leaving reviews on Glassdoor. They even have a section for your interview experience.
Right.
Like, how was your interview? Did you get the job? Yes or no? So people can actually get a glimpse to not just your employees and what they think about working there, but now there's a whole section, or maybe there always has been, about how they feel about just interviewing. So it's just everywhere. Let's see. I think that covers candidate experience. Anything you wanted to add? Any experiences you had? Anything before we switch over to the workplace?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned some, experiences and examples that I've had throughout it. So I don't have any, true anecdotes. I'm sure some other things will come up as we continue the conversation, just to kind of put a bow on the candidate experience. They're just important, kind of the main three, I guess maybe four, if you add this last one on there, would be to creating a positive experience is, of course, timely and detailed communication, transparency throughout the process, personalization, right? We'll get into this in the next conversation, but a lot of professionals are starting to utilize AI tools, and it's great. It saves us time, but it can also take the personal or personalization aspect out of it, right? You never want to send a message or email or even offer that just says like, hi, ... comma, right? Address them. Just make sure you're putting some personalization in there. If there's something you had talked about or they asked about something, make sure to address that. Don't just constantly use templates. It's great for saving time, but if you really want to capture talent, just add a little bit personal touch to it. And then kind of the fourth and most important, be consistent in all of that. You can do it for 99 candidates, and the 100th candidate that you don't do it for, that's the thing that's going to be the one candidate that puts something negative on Glassdoor or responds to your survey. And then next thing you know, you're tuning up your process, which is good, right? Every once in a while, you need a reminder too. But if you can be consistent, then you avoid all of that.
Yeah, exactly. That was a nice wrap up. Really good tips here from TA and candidate side. So yeah, take it seriously out there. From both perspectives. So jumping into the workforce, gosh, I mean, the last 2 to 3 years has been massive changes, but we're gonna kind of highlight, where was the workplace before? Where is it right now? And obviously the future is just kind of assumptions and guesses, but where are we headed? So I guess we'll just start in the past compared to today. What are those main differences from before and now?
Right. So before, the complicated term, right? Are we saying before COVID or like before all that, old traditional way, right? And I'm just joking, but of course, there's just been so
That's
much
a good
changes.
question. Both.
Right. But there's just been so many changes in the last 3-4 years. And you go before COVID even more. Let's say take COVID out of it, we're 5-10 years before that. It was kind of the traditional American corporate environment. Everyone worked in person. There was very minimal casual work attire. People were wearing suits and ties, full, dresses or, pantsuits, things like that. It was a traditional 8 or 9 to 5. And really it was work, hustle, and all extra time you had hopefully would go to personal things, or sometimes you would also still be working, right? So a totally different environment. It was kind of, hey, this is the job. If you can do it, we'll pay you. Some of them gave benefits, some of them didn't, or some better than others. And it was just kind of more on the employer company end, right? And the market was more on the company end or employer end, and the candidates were, struggling for some time, especially past 2008 until probably 2014, 2015 was when it finally kind of was at its full swing again. And so it was totally different. And then you bring COVID in, and all companies that were 100% in person and had all these leases and office buildings across the country had to move mass amounts of talent home to be safe. For some companies, they didn't even have work equipment. So when COVID happened, they had to ship all that stuff to them. And some of them didn't have it for a month or two. And the plants that were making the computers and chips were shut down too. And so it was a big shock. But it also is an eye opener, and not to gloss over COVID. There's obviously a ton of changes there, but I want to get more to how that affected now. What companies realize is, one, increase in productivity, and that people didn't have to be in person to do a good job. And also, people started to focus a lot more on their own work-life balance. And there was also kind of a shift from the market being more employer-driven to now employee candidate-driven, which I think is positive, right? It gave swing to this work-life balance. It's not just all about the money and benefits and stability. It's about work-life balance again, but finding the best match for you personally and professionally, rather than just, okay, hopefully it works out personally for me and my goals if I am successful professionally. Now they want both to be hand in hand. And with that, companies realize, oh, we don't have to spend all this money on these office leases and buildings and things like that, at least not for the entire organization. There are essential workers, roles that do need to be in person, especially on my end in the government. And then post-pandemic, they have moved, more people back in person. But companies like mine that are government contractors, they're not direct government employees, but they're also not quite in the commercial sector. They're coming in that blend of both. We do have a lot more flexibility. They're not having to go to the base every day, where before, to be a successful government contractor, a lot of people were going to the base and their work office all in the same day, almost every day. Now it's, okay, you're in the office when you need to do your team meetings. You can go to the client site as needed. Anything that you're not having to do, like classified work or anything sensitive, you can do at home, right? And that's at the side where in-person work is probably most essential. And so the amount of flexibility that have been introduced there is awesome for employees and candidates, but it's just really important as the workforce changes, because we'll get into it as we move into more of the future, but a lot more focus on hybrid roles. We'll get into some of the AI enhanced workflows and things like that people are introducing, and then just overall employee well-being. But there's just been a ton of changes, especially in the last 4 years.
Yeah, for sure. Why do you think a major topic you've focused on was that work-life balance and it becoming more in the candidate's palm, generally speaking? Why do you think that changed? I mean, was there anything specific that made people start thinking, oh, let me think about my personal life now?
Right. Well, so I don't think there's any one factor to it. I think one, it was just an eye opener. Everyone went home and they were forced to kind of balance their personal and their professional life all at home. And so by balancing that, they realized everything went quote, quote, back to normal. Not really, but kind of a new normal. They realized they like that. They want to keep that. Even if they are going back in person, they want to have flexibility to where they're not having to be in the office 40, 50, 60 hours a week to get the job done. They want to be able to get the job done and go home and spend time with family, do fun things personally and things like that. And also it goes back to candidate experience, and why it's so crucial there is the market is really more on the employee side rather than the employer side like it was pre-pandemic. So there are a lot of jobs out there, but most candidates are actively employed, or at least looking for the next best thing. So they have options. It takes more than just a salary, comp package, benefits, work location, right? They want more. They want a positive experience. They want to work somewhere where they can get along with people and go home and still have energy and time to do other things. So it's really important on our end. It's super competitive because you shrink that pool even more when you add a clearance requirement, and they need to be local, right? Because if you have a clearance, you're having to go in somewhere to do classified work. So you can't just be anywhere, or you're going to have to travel a lot, which is another thing. People are a little less likely to travel on a daily, weekly basis, right? They'll do it occasionally. So it just kind of a pendulum shift there, which is why it's important, because now you're not just from a talent side stacking up against competing offers, you're competing against different lifestyles that each role offers as well. So you kind of have to really dig into what that candidate's looking for.
Yeah, it makes sense. Do you think that, well, I don't even know, I guess social media has been around, but it just seems like so much more prevalent in our lives. Like we talked about it earlier, like people posting on LinkedIn, people have so much access to information and people are sharing their emotions and everything. Do you think that had any sort of play in that change too, or not really?
I think it definitely did. I think we're still kind of trying to comprehend how social media as a whole is affecting society, but especially in the professional side, I think it's definitely recent for like professional networks like LinkedIn and things like that to have like content creators on it. Right. There was always people that would like put posts on it, but it was a little bit more like old school Facebook posts where people were just like in their fields and would like write a very long post. But now they're like making content like it's Instagram, TikTok, and putting it on LinkedIn. And it's not just about like marketing their role. They're also calling out things that they like or dislike about certain work environments and employers and things like that. So I think for people that used to stay in jobs, this is another thing that's changed is people used to stay in jobs, 10, 20 years, retire and go forth. Now, especially in the tech space, people are changing jobs every 2 years because there was some Reddit thread that they read that said, oh, you'll increase your total compensation earnings if you change jobs every 2 years and things like that. And I disagree with that, but there's a different, topic that we can have another day on that. But there's all different kinds of forums and like videos and things like that on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram that are showing people that the grass is greener, right? And that's all it takes is for them to actually think the grass is greener somewhere else to start looking for something. So I think it definitely has had an impact where there wasn't that content. So as long as they were happy and were stable and paying bills, they stayed in that job. But now they are constantly hearing of the grass is greener and there are better opportunities, new opportunities out there that they're just starting to look more frequently.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll give this tip to the audience. I don't want to say, especially if you're a candidate, because I think TA probably just sees this a little bit more, but the unfortunate, like, toxic thing I've seen on LinkedIn, and I've said this in a couple of my podcast episodes, so sorry if this is repetitive, but I think it's so important, is a lot of the people I see on LinkedIn, especially, is they'll talk about their experience or like what you should, like the grass is greener, what you should be angry at your employer. And it's like almost creating this employer employee, like subconscious fight in a way. But then I go to that person's profile because sometimes I'm like, that's not true. Like that sounds way off. And then I'll go to their profile and they're just a content creator and they've never been a recruiter. They've worked for themselves for 15 years and it's just clickbait. But then people just read it and they don't think to like look further. And then it's like they get angry too and they're in the comments and they're getting really hyped up. And it makes me sad because like a lot of people are in good jobs, but they think it's bad because they just see something fake online and like, oh, I make all this money and this. And it's like, there's just so much fake for clickbait. And I see it in recruitment now. And I don't know if it's been around, but I just started noticing it in the past, like since COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great tip, not just for looking for jobs and LinkedIn content. That's for all social media content. Like being literate with social media is something that I'm not great at, but I am trying to learn and increase my literacy there. That always look into stuff. There is so much stuff that, like you said, is just clickbait and it's really just for them to get a payout. They don't care how it affects the people that are actually consuming that content. So always do your research, especially if it is going to affect your professional or personal decisions, career-wise or, family-wise. Like be careful, just getting that information and taking it as like true data and like scientific facts. Like go and look at their profile. Don't just trust someone just because the algorithm gave it to you. So just be careful of that. And kind of going back to the reviews things, like the negative stuff is going to speak a lot louder than the positive stuff. Or if you're starting to look for the grass is greener, someone that is kind of showing that they're at your end goal sounds great and you want to get there as soon as possible, but they're leaving out the part of the steps that they got there, or they're going to tell you, for money, I can tell you how to get there, right? And so that should immediately be a red flag, right? So there are some places that can actually, be beneficial, but don't just jump into it all the way without doing a little bit of research.
Yes, yes. Please do your research. And the thing is, these people don't even hide that they're solely clickbaiting. You go to their profile and it's
Right.
like content creator, copywriter, and it's like these people know
Right.
how to push your buttons. That's what they're trained on.
Yeah.
They know how
And
to get you coming to their website and stuff. So,
right. And I really find it hard to believe that so many companies are doing all these things wrong to where they are, hurting their workforce and just kind of throwing their talent to the wayside. I really don't think so. Some of the changes, I think companies are being a lot more aware of it. Or maybe I'm wrong and I'm just very spoiled and work for a great organization. So just be careful of that. And if there are concerns, take that to the folks that are in charge and one, verify if that is true, and two, see if you can spark some change in a productive, healthy way. Don't go in angry, right? But try to spark that change, because that's another thing that I think happened in the remote work is it was really easy to point fingers at what is wrong with organizations and process, and not enough people that wanted to point out the problem, but also provide a solution. You have to step up and make the change yourself if you want
exactly, exactly. Oh gosh, that's a whole nother topic I could talk about. That's like one thing I'm super passionate about. I do a lot of career coaching and I've gotten so many people promotions and it all comes down to what you just said, honestly. I'm like, well, you're mad about all these things. Have you voiced it? Have you offered a solution? No. Well, businesses want solutions. They don't want no business is out there purposely having a bad candidate experience or purposely ruining their employees' lives. It doesn't benefit the business, makes them lose money. There's no motive to, not a single motive why a company would purposely do these things. Not one. No one
it.
makes
Right.
money off of unhappy customers and candidates or employees.
Yeah, but when I was working on the staffing side, right, you're typically a third party consultant. You're coming in to either in a couple of ways, but either to fill key roles or they have not focused on their talent arm. They kind of put it all in HR, and HR is doing all the million difficult things they're doing in HR and also trying to do talent, which is equally as difficult and time consuming. And when you do that, it's hard to be successful on both. And so they'll bring in a staffing agency or consultant to help focus on the talent piece so they can keep doing some of their other priorities. And, being brought in there, you're having to kind of navigate, find process improvement. And then there are others where maybe they just have one or two positions that they're struggling to get, and they need you to come in and be that head hunter for them. But they don't want you to come in and be that third party kind of staffing arm. And so they'll either bring you on to do that, and then they get you out because they have invested a lot of funds and time and resources into building their own talent arm. And of course, as a staffing agency, it stinks, right? Because that's a short-term relationship. You're not going to see a lot of return on investment of your time there, but it is a good feeling knowing that a company is investing in that. And that is something that, drew me from the agency world to 26 was when they reached out to me. It was kind of like a client reaching out and trying to poach me away from the agency. And it's like, well, thank you. I'm flattered, but no, thank you. And they reached out and I heard them out and they're like, well, talent is like a key strategy of ours. We want to build out this whole talent group, not part of HR, but alongside HR to focus on that. Because for us to be successful, we have to be successful in talent. And that was just music to my ears. I was able to come over and be a part of that growth. And we've tripled in size just in 3 years. So it's just a great feeling. And so for companies, I would suggest to try to mirror that in your own way, right? Every place does it differently. There's different successful strategies, but invest in your talent. Don't just hope that you can get the most out of your HR people. They are already working very hard for you. Bring someone in that can specialize in talent and you'll be successful. The candidate and employees will benefit from it. So those are some good changes that I'm seeing.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll add this to that. And not to put anyone who hasn't been in staffing down at all. We all have very similar experiences, but most of the time when I hire recruiters for companies, they say, not from an agency, not from an agency. And I'm like, that's so interesting. Like you went from agency to this and helped build out their strategy and team and everything. And they've tripled in size, like you said, in a short amount of time. And I think when someone comes from agency, you've worked with so many different companies. You've gotten so much candidate feedback. You're very focus on candidate experience because it's your candidate experience on top of someone else's candidate experience. You're kind of working for 100 different companies instead of one. So you just are exposed to so much.
Right.
You see how a bad practice affects a candidate. You see how a good practice, you see how good
Mhm.
benefits change a conversation, bad benefits can change a conversation. So you're exposed to so much. And I see a lot of people go from staffing to internal, especially those who are building out their TA teams, and they just crush it. And I don't know, it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up to your comment of no agency recruiters, no agency recruiters. I disagree with that, but I also think it's important to have a diverse talent team, right? Don't only hire internal recruiters, don't only hire staffing or agency recruiters, right? Have a blend. And that's something that we've done at 26, that our vice president of talent has done a great job of bringing in folks that have done the internal recruiting for government contracting companies, for commercial companies. A few of us have come from the staffing agency world, and each of us had a slightly different approach, right? There are some roles in hiring managers that do better with a traditional internal recruiter. There are others that need that, but the roles are so difficult. They need that agency where they're constantly on the hunt. They know what it takes to fill these difficult roles. So it really depends. Take a look at what roles you have, what are the issues you're having, and then tailor the role to that, because it's not always going to be the same. Every recruiter you hire is not going to be the same, and you don't want them to be.
Yeah, it is. It is. We can tie it into the future. Diversify your hires. That's where we think the future should go, maybe, or me. We kind of agree with that too. But
No, absolutely. D&I is obviously a huge initiative and has been, but it's on the forefront, and I don't think it is going anywhere, right? Companies are growing, and there's more jobs than there are candidates right now for the most part. And so you want to be sure that you're getting diverse talent. Like you said, get different perspectives in there on things of solving problems and changing processes. So that is definitely a direction that we're focused on now, is going to continue being something that companies focus on in the future.
yeah. So what other predictions do you have about the future? The big one is remote work, job hopping that may affect a business and how they operate, possibly. I'm not sure. But what are your thoughts on the future? Are people going back into the office? It's going to be remote. There's AI. What does the future look like for us?
It depends on the company, on the remote aspect, right? And the role. I can't think of any companies that can just completely be remote and not have an office, right? For them to run their systems, they have to have some kind of server closet somewhere, which means they have to have some kind of IT person somewhere working on it, right? So I think it's going to depend on the role. There are certain roles, like the customer service side of things, where they can totally be remote, and a lot of them have already done that. So I think it's really going to depend. I think the preference is definitely hybrid. I think people have realized they like remote flexibility, but they do like the option of going in hybrid. So it's more like remote with in-person options is definitely where I'm seeing a lot of things going. On the government end, it's a little harder to do that. It's more of mostly in-person with hybrid flexibility. And again, try to under promise and over deliver, then reverse, right? You want to tell them it is intended to be an in-person role, but there is some flexibility, unless the role is like, no, you have to be in this secure lab 8 to 5 every day. And then you want to be transparent up front. But we have a lot of roles where it's like, it's great for you to be in person so that you can hop in there and do that work when necessary. But if you knock all that out and then you have a few hours at the end of the day that you can do like to work remote, cool, go home early and finish up your day at home. So there is some flexibility there, but we rather not say, hey, it's hybrid or remote, and be like, actually, can you come in the office? It's going to depend on the company, but I think more of flexibility to getting as close to hybrid as possible is where we're going, probably in general. AI. So that's a buzzword that's been around for a long time, especially in talent, where a few years ago, it was kind of like pushing the fear aspect of it is AI going to eliminate recruiting? Like, are we in danger? To like just a year later of, no, we're fine, but the roles are going to evolve with the ones that adopt AI tools and workflows the quickest are going to survive. And the ones that are most reluctant to learn new technologies, especially in the AI front, are going to be the ones that fall behind, just because of how much you can accomplish by utilizing those tools. It cuts out so much time. You can reach a much larger audience by using those tools.
AI, it seems like, is going to boost productivity a lot, especially like you said, if you know how to utilize it and whatnot. I see a lot of people saying 4-day work week, and then I'm like, well, maybe with AI, it'd be so productive that people can go to a 4-day work week, or businesses just say, now our productivity increased by 50%, but we're still going to do a solid 40-hour work week minimum. Do you see that changing?
I think that's kind of similar to the remote hybrid thing. It really depends. There are some companies that could get away with that. There are others that could not. I think it's definitely possible. But again, it's not going to be shortening the weeks sub 40 hours a week. It's going to be doing those 40 hours in a condensed schedule. So a lot of people already do that naturally, right? We have like a flexible, we call it flex time, where as long as you're working, our timesheets are every 2 weeks, 80 hours within those 2 weeks. We're not going to be mad when those are done. Obviously, we have core operating hours, but like if you front load your month, you can work less the second half of your month. So there is some flexibility there. And that's something that companies can look into, is not just limiting the schedule flexibility to the timesheet period, but opening it up to the calendar month. I think everyone will still be working 40 hours a week, just might be different. Maybe they're working, the 410s or 312s or, interesting schedules that they have out there.
Yeah. I know, it's me being optimistic, and I give this example to people because they're like, "Oh, it makes sense. We're more productive and say productivity, but now we can have more personal life." And I'm like, "Well, you could, but I don't think that's going to happen. I'm with you. I don't think it's going to happen." I know you said the human aspect is really important. It's odd because with AI and everything, there used to not at least when I started recruiting, there wasn't a recruiter and a sourcer. Like the recruiter just did the sourcing and then they split it.
Right.
And now there's like, I'm like, what the heck is a sourcer? But I don't know if I just missed that somewhere in my career.
Yeah. So we utilize sourcers, and my wife always makes fun and calls them sorcerers because she also wasn't familiar with the term. And they do work their magic. But yeah, so we do utilize that, and it just keeping a constant pipeline of talent so that the recruiters can focus on progressing the talent. And it's just cutting out because as a recruiter, you find the talent and then you have to spend some time moving it through the next stages. So sometimes there's some lapse between your kind of progression stages. So there's a lapse where you can't constantly be churning that talent pool. So the sourcers and AI tools can constantly be doing it. AI tools are good because you can set sequence emails up where you don't have to set manual reminders to, I messaged this person a few days ago or a week ago or a month ago, let me follow back up. You can set it up where it is doing that for you. And if you need to add a personalization in there, it will notify you, hey, it's time, add your personalization note and send it. As well as like sourcing, you can have these safe searches and workflows going where it's constantly looking for resumes based off of whatever criteria you do it. So it's saving you time from having to manually do everything, do every single search, every single outreach, every single follow-up message. You can reduce the time so you can focus on putting your attention on like the meaningful actions and not just like the administrative piece of it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I thought that there would be less jobs in TA with AI. But do you see that happening in the future where we still need sourcers and recruiters, or do you see it just, again, kind of making it more productive and we'll still need both of those jobs? Or do you see everything just becoming a recruiter and then them just having those more AI sourcing tools? Which direction would you have if you had to guess?
So I don't think it's a copy paste all kind of solution. I think it depends for us. We're looking for very niche talent, difficult talent that has a lot of different options. So for us, all of them are kind of necessary. We're leveraging AI, we're using sourcers, and we have full cycle recruiters involved in our process. There are others where maybe they can get away with a more automated process. I know some large companies, I don't even know if you talk to a real person until you're like getting an offer. There's some where your initial screen is like recorded through AI and it's like thinks about it and then spits out a response or a follow-up question. I guess it works if you're doing like high volume recruiting. So I think for some of that, yeah, AI will take over some of that. There's some companies or jobs that don't need sourcers or aggressive external outreach, right? It's more of attracting inbound applicants and things like that. So I think it depends. I don't think any one area is going to go away or one piece take over another. I think it depends on your organization, the type of talent you're looking for. But there could be companies that move completely to AI. It can work, right? If you have a strong brand, maybe you don't need as much closing power from a talent team, but I'm not an advocate for that. I think personalization touch is what gets you there, not an AI tool sending out an automatic offer, right? I think there are a lot of concerns with that, especially with a lot of like fraud or like spam offers going on. I think that is making it hard for companies to go fully to like an automated process.
Yeah, agreed. That makes sense with the high volume stuff too. That was a lot of tips on where we're headed, or tips rather, but guesses on where we're headed in the future, and they're all exciting. Our lives will get more flexible, and hopefully those who aren't getting luck with those hybrid roles, maybe more jobs will become available to you to get that hybrid position that you've been wanting, a remote. Kind of a dream for some people that haven't got to experience it yet, unfortunately. But yeah, so this is a really good conversation. I think that wraps it. Thanks for coming, Zach, today, and really good tips for candidates and talent acquisition. I think either whether you came here as a candidate or TA, I think you can learn from both sides of it. So hopefully this was really beneficial to you guys. You learned something. You can take it with you in your next interview, job search, whatever it is for you. But that's it. So thanks for listening today. And if you have any questions or anything, just comment on the YouTube thread and we'll get that answered for you as soon as we can.